wider margin than MLA would want, and as a course of critical practice, right? That's one of the practices is standardizing your format, so watch out for that. But there are a couple other things that I want to point out in the style sheet. This is also online, by the way, so if you want to use, I think it's in the policies section of the website. You can download a doc version of this, and if you want to cheat, it'll have all the settings. It'll have this document and all the settings are there, so you just change the requisite information and overwrite this document. At any rate, in here are some things to be aware of that might be different from what you learned, because I know that when I learned MLA in high school, things were slightly different, especially with block quotation. So there's the block quotation here on the first page, right? And that everything is double spaced these days. And when I was younger, block quotations were like 1.5 spaced or single spaced, right? They've changed it now so that everything top to bottom is double spaced. So in an MLA document, you should never hit return more than once ever. So everything is exactly the same. So no extra space between the title and the first paragraph. All of that is in there. So block quotes are 1 inch indent, so 1 extra ½ inch indented and double spaced. There's no quotation marks on a block quotation. Right? So be aware of some of those punctuation stuff if you examine this document. What else? A couple other little things. An ellipsis, if you ever do use an ellipsis to cut out part of a quotation or something like that, if you watch carefully when you hit 3 dots in Word, those 3 dots kind of go, right, and they automatically transform into a single character ellipsis. If you hit backspace, it'll erase all 3 dots. MLA wants to override that by putting a space between each period. So if you turn to the second page of the style sheet, if you look down about 2/3 of the way through the first paragraph there, there's a little quotation from Moby Dick. If then Sir William Jones ... could not read the simplest peasant's face in its profounder and more subtle meanings, etc., that spaced ellipsis is an MLA formatted ellipsis as opposed to
including the brackets. You mean?
That's optional,
Okay.
right? Typically in MLA you assume, and I did that in this example just to show that. You can bracket them to indicate that you've changed that part of the quotation. But typically these days in MLA, you assume that ellipses are the writer's choice without brackets, unless in the parentheses you would say ellipsis original or something to that effect. You just insist that that's in the original text and I'm not changing that part of the text. If the author you're quoting, right, were to use an ellipsis. Does that make sense? So you can or cannot use brackets when you elide someone's text. That's up to you. Anything else that anyone notices in there? I've noticed a couple things. Be careful as I've gotten proposals and things like that. Be careful with quotations in italics of titles of works. Remember that poems get quotations, books of poems get italics. Right? Short stories, essays, articles get quotation marks. Book length things get italics. Right? Full length films, feature length films get italics. Short films, not that we're dealing with any of those, get quotation marks. That kind of thing.
Underline isn't cool anymore, right?
It is. Consistency is cool. Is the only thing. So if you're gonna, underline, always underline and don't use italics. If you're gonna italicize, always italicize and don't underline. Right? So it's kind of a taste. Ready? Like your own essay? Yeah, absolutely. I tend to, No, there's not a. I mean, typically a subtitle in an academic MLA formatted essay is after a colon, so it would be an MLA style sheet : Eileen is great, or something like that. Right? Oh, you mean footnote?
Yeah. What the paragraph talks about, and then what each paragraph.
Oh, I see. So kind of subtitle each paragraph. Yeah, you can. There's no format for it. Just don't hit return more than once, right? So if you were to, I don't know, turn to the second page of the style sheet here. If you were to wanna subtitle this paragraph as a new
Right.
section in the essay, you just hit return here, center that title, right? And then hit return again, and
Okay.
type that paragraph. Yeah, so there's nothing, really specific, stylistically about that. You don't wanna overdo it, of course, you don't want a subtitle for every paragraph.
Right, yeah.
So, a couple, in a short essay like this, 6 to 8 pages, 2 or 3 sections is probably plenty. If you
Okay.
wanna think about that. If you want to section your essay, you don't have to. So, other questions?
I have a seek in here. Is that a sexual illness?
A seek?
You know what I'm talking about, where there's maybe a typo or grammatical error.
Oh, yeah.
That's good, should we work with that?
Yeah, if you wanna seek things, yeah.
Okay.
If it's, if you wanna maintain the original, and typically that's good practice to demonstrate that.
That you know it's their typo, not mine.
Yeah, right. So if that comes into play, absolutely. And the format for that is brackets and then seek, since it's Latin, will be in italics. And that's another, generally speaking, foreign words are in italics. If they haven't been naturalized into English usage, like, I don't know, rendezvous or I don't know, what's another foreign word that we use regularly, you don't need to italicize those specific foreign words. It's kind of a judgment call. Caitlin, did you have a question?
Yeah. So what if I'm quoting, I guess maybe the best way would be to just introduce it, but if I'm quoting something that is quoted within an article,
Yeah,
how would I do that in a citation?
you would, if you were not doing it here, I thought I did it here. Yeah, I don't have it in here, I thought I had it in simple. The format is QTD, so if you have, oops. It would look something like that, right?
Okay.
So if you're talking about Hawthorne, but you're getting it from somewhere else that you're also using in your essay, you just put QTD dot in marks,
Thanks.
right? Is that what you're after?
That's
And then if you wanted to do it more thoroughly, if you wanted to include more of some of Marx's text around that quotation, you could indicate that in the sentence,
Okay.
right? The sentence outside or the introductory sentence outside of the quotation within a quotation, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Yeah, good question. Anything else? Yeah.
If you do do that, if it's a short enough quotation to do it in quotation marks, and you have a quotation within that quotation, do you use the single quotation
Yeah.
mark?
Yep, so single quote, it's the opposite in Britain, but in America it's single quotes indicate a quotation within a quotation, double quotes indicate the external quotation. Good question there too. Trying to think of something else I had thought while you were talking, and I've forgotten it. I was just going to talk generally about punctuation for citations. This is something that's just kind of hard to get used to, and maybe we talked about this a little bit in the past, I can't remember. But the punctuation is tricky. In this case, notice that I didn't put any ending punctuation here after the quotation before the citation begins. I didn't put a comma or anything like that. If this is the end of a quotation or it's the end of a phrase or whatever, you don't put any ending punctuation within a quotation that you're citing, unless it's an exclamation point or a question mark, right? Because those are specialized. But if this is the end of a sentence that Hawthorne's writing in Marx's article, you don't put any ending punctuation, end the quotation mark, and then you have the citation, and the period goes outside of that text. If it was a question mark, you would still put the question mark in, and then end your sentence with a period, unless your sentence was also a question, but usually that's not the case. That makes sense to everybody? Remember that end quote, close quotation, no ending punctuation unless it's specialized. Citation, no comma, right, between the name and the page number, just the name, space, page number, ending parentheses, and then ending punctuation for your sentence.
What,
It's persnickety stuff.
what if it's a semicolon? I mean, yeah,
A semicolon?
yeah, or a colon.
Yeah, unless you're quoting poetry for, it's funny you bring that up, because my dissertation, I had to deal with that question a lot, because the poet that I was writing about ends a lot of his lines and a lot of his phrases with colons. It's kind of this, it's a signature of his poetic style, and in that case you would include, you know, if it has something to do with, you know, some structural element of the writing, then you would want to include that. But if this is the end of a, you know, a colon and a semicolon both indicate the end of some clause, so in that case they're ending punctuation just like a period would be, so you would leave them out of the quotation. Yeah. So the only real exceptions that I can think of are question marks and exclamation points. Yeah. This is fun. I love I nerd out on this stuff. So,
So that takes me to sort of get Elizabeth Bishop's
yeah. Oh yeah.
poem, and then on the second page. And so what if each, I mean, you know, you're quoting with the slashes,
Mhm.
you're quoting more than one line. Can you talk a little bit about any punctuation before each slash, whether or not you use it, and then also capitalization of the poems?
Yeah.
And lastly,
Yeah.
what you see people do, they have in parentheses or in brackets, they have the a letter capitalized or you know, they change part of a word or something.
Yeah, all good questions. So in this case, we may as well just look at it. On page 2 there of the style guide, when you're quoting poetry, if you quote more than 4 lines, and this is a judgment call too. Some people treat poetic lines like lines of prose on a page. So the rule, to step back one step, the rule for block quotations, generally speaking, is if the quotation you're quoting, or the passage you're quoting, is going to run uninterrupted for 4 or more lines of text, then you block it. But poetry is different, obviously, since poetic lines are shorter typically than a full, you know, width of a piece of paper. So you kind of have to make a judgment call about what you want to show in that quotation of the poetry. So in this case, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of Bishop quoted, but I do it in line by separating each line with a forward slash, right, and a space around each of the slashes. Now, in this case, you would copy you would quote it just as it is. So if there's a comma or a dash or some sort of punctuation, no matter what it is, within the quotation that ends a line, you include it, right, because it's still within your quotation marks. So just copy it bit for bit. So you can see the example there from Near Province's line of fish and bread and tea, comma, line, home of the lone tides where the bay leaves the sea, right? I kept that comma because it's part of the poem, right? But if Bishop doesn't capitalize a lot of her first lines, if she did, like Wordsworth does, right? So if you're quoting Wordsworth, for example, you would just include those capitals as well, right? Since that's the original. So that said, in other texts, and I don't think I did it here, in other texts, if you are embedding, actually, let's kill 2 birds with 1 stone here. I'm going to hand out this next sheet. If you are embedding someone else's quotation into your writing, so if say, you have a quotation from Leo Marx that says, say you're going to quote the first page of his book, right? The pastoral ideal has been used to define the meaning of America ever since the age of discovery. So you're going to quote that, right? And in your text you say, Leo Marx proclaims that, quote, the pastoral ideal has been used to define the meaning of America ever since the age of discovery. You would want to, since that can't, a capital letter can't follow that in a sentence, right? You would bracket that capital T and use a small t. Right? So it would be,
And it's brackets but not parentheses, because
Right.
anytime you alter it, it's brackets.
Yep, so if you alter text and you're including it in quotation, square brackets. Yeah. And even for something as tiny as this, it just doesn't change the text, but it changes the capitalization, because you're embedding it into your own syntax. Right? If you were to say, Mark's claims, then you're quoting as though it's a new sentence, right? Mark's claims, comma, then you can maintain that punctuation.
Because the comma separates the clauses.
Yep. Yeah, in a quotation setting, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's, again, it's kind of persnickety, but yeah.
Isn't it bad to put that kind of is, you know?
In this case, no. Mark's claim, because that's just a speechy thing. Mark's claims that this is the case, you know, or he argues that X, Y, or Z. But it is a stylistic thing. I mean, that does tend to feel a little more formal in this kind of sentence, or excuse me, a little more informal than Mark's claims or Mark's argues. You could say something like, as Mark's claims, pastoral ideal as Is that clear for everybody? I mean, it comes with practice, so I'm not going to be too terribly persnickety about it, but it's worth noting at any rate. Any other questions about formatting? And as they come up, you can feel free to email me. We're excited. We haven't talked much about, but there is an example of a very short works cited page